And it's a big welcome to the show, Tamatha Paul. Tamatha is the police and courts spokesperson, also the youth justice spokesperson. So it kind of fits pretty well in this whole conversation around sentencing and courts and what the government's telling the judiciary to do. So, Tam, thanks for joining us this evening.
Oh, good. Lots to get into today.
Oh, mate, it's going to be one of those shows, I think. One of those weeks, one of those years, maybe.
One of those
Now,
terms.
we want to talk about this idea for heavier sentencing for people who commit violent acts against first offenders. But if you're okay, I want to start in a slightly different place. And it kind of comes back to the impartiality of the judiciary. This was the Prime Minister this morning with Mr. Bridge, Ryan Bridge. Just have a listen to what's said here. And I actually think this has been kind of skipped by a lot of the media because this is just how you introduce it. But I actually think there's a really important point that people are missing. So have a listen to this.
We'll start with law and order because you've got a bunch of announcements coming out this week, stuff we've already had. Is your big problem here actually getting the courts to do what you guys are telling them to do? I mean, we've sort of seen this with first responders. It's been legislated before that they're to be taken care of when it comes to sentencing, but, do the courts really pay it much attention?
Well, there's sort of three things we've been trying to do. One is we've got to get tough on gangs for violent crime. We've got to get, sort out serious young offending, get rid of the ram raids, which has been going on. And the third bit is making sure we've got some serious consequences for some serious crimes. So, yes, we are mandating that through legislation because we want to be crystal clear about the expectations. Today, tomorrow, actually, our new legislation comes in where we're limiting what judges can discount sentences by, based on you can't have multiple reasons for remorse, all that kind of stuff.
But will they just increase the discounts on other things? You know what I mean?
We've got the gist because, people don't realise we've got the gist because let me just explain it out. Ryan Bridge says, is this about how you're going to get the courts to do what you want them to do? I don't want to sort of be overly dramatic, but that sounds very authoritarian. So tell me if I'm wrong, right? You're the MP, you're in this world, but it feels like you've got a government instructing the courts what to do. Now, that means there's no judicial impartiality. The way I thought it worked was the government makes the legislation, the courts interpret how that's to be applied. And if these guys are saying, like I said, I want to talk about the first responders, but if these guys are saying, you must now sentence the way we decide, the precedence that sets is that when you loopy lefties get in, you're going to tell the courts, I'm being silly, but to instruct them to do it in a different way. Aren't we supposed to have impartiality with that judicial? Shouldn't that be outside of what the government can instruct them to do? And what am I missing?
Yeah, well, the first point you made about the separation of powers, our government intentionally separates those who create the laws and those who enforce the laws through our courts. That those are separated for a reason to keep to try and make the system fair. And the reason that there's been all of these bills that the government has been doing, like the first responders bill or like the coward punch bill, is because we have a government and government parties that are unhappy that judges are using imprisonment as a tool of punishment. They're using it less and less. And the reason that they're using it less is because they are seeing the same people cycling through our court system, because when they go to prison, they're not being rehabilitated, they're not changing their actions, they're not changing their attitudes, and therefore the same things are happening over and over again. So they have realized, which a lot of researchers and people have been saying for a long time, that prisons don't work. They don't change people's behaviors, they don't change people's attitudes, and therefore judges are looking for actual effective evidence-based ways to change people's behavior. And so that upsets our government, because our government's idea of a justice system is based on revenge and retribution, right? They want to punish people by putting them into prison and subjecting them to terrible conditions. Whereas I guess people in the Greens or people in Labour or on the left want a justice system based on rehabilitation, actually changing the underlying drivers of why people commit crime in the first place. So you can make lots of different things crimes, whether that's assaulting a first responder, whether that's the nature by which you assault people, whether that's, any of those factors. But if the result of those are simply longer terms of imprisonment, it's not actually going to get at the nature of those crimes or the nature of those events and solve or change the attitudes that underlie or the factors that underlie that behavior, so they don't work.
Yeah.
It's also really interesting that they're doing all of this right now, because last week the New Zealand Law Society put out a report called Strengthening the Rule of Law in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this is a report that is created by members of the Law Society who might be lawyers, judges, people who are in the legal world. And one of the big things that they're worried about is the lack of judicial independence that has come about
Yeah.
because of these
I
kinds
mean,
of policies.
like I said, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but it sounds very Putin-y. Putin-y will tell the courts what to do. I know that's too far, but it's on that pathway. I mean, in like 10, 15 years ago, when Bill English became Prime Minister for about 3 minutes, he
Yeah.
called prison the University of Crime.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
so
It's the
it's another.
Ministry of Connections, not the Ministry of Corrections. Like, let's be real. That's what people are doing there. There are drugs in prisons. They are able to strengthen their connections and become more fit, more active, and better connected. So if that's what people want, then keep sending them to jail.
And what I hear you saying, like if we take a step back and look at the two options, what I hear you saying is you guys want the best outcome for everyone, society, the victim, and the offender, and the right want to put people behind bars for a period of time and fuck them. And then what they're getting is when they come out of prison, as you say, they've made more connections. So their system's not working.
No. Never has, because if police and prisons worked, then we'd live in a completely safe society right now. But in New Zealand, I've found that we're unwilling to address the true drivers of crime. And when I think about incidences like coward punches, alcohol almost always plays a role in these kinds of events. But are we talking about alcohol harm and reducing the access to alcohol? Nah, we're having a conversation about longer term imprisonments. So it is hard. But this whole playbook also reminds me of American politics, because I saw a video again just last week of Donald Trump talking about unelected judges and just that kind of rhetoric around unelected judges and this idea that because judges aren't elected, they're not democratic and don't have the best interests of the public in mind, which is untrue. But it's and it was that rhetoric came up a lot during the Treaty Principles Bill as well, this idea of unelected judges. And it's basically just to sow seeds of distrust with our judges and our judicial system, so that those processes and systems can be hijacked by politicians.
So just before we go into the specific conversation around the new legislation they want to pass around attacks on first offenders, what is this a warning bell about the government directing the courts as to what to do? Should we be worried? What needs to happen about that?
Yeah, this is just part of their approach to managing, almost micromanaging what tools they have available. And the reason that it's a problem is because first, it flies in the face of evidence and the reasons why judges are using imprisonment less and less as a tool, because it's not effective and it doesn't rehabilitate people or change behaviors. But it also is creating an environment whereby lots of decisions that judges will make will be challenged and judicially reviewed, because they are being made based on these kind of arbitrary rules that the government is making, as opposed to the logic that they would traditionally use. So it's going to backlog the courts even further and reduce people's ability to access justice through the courts, because judges will be caught up in all of these reviews based on their decisions when you remove things like sentencing discounts and when you put in place these rigid rules. Because you've got to look at this in the context of the last 18 months of having this government. 3 strikes have been brought back. Sentencing law reforms have limited judges' abilities to confer sentencing discounts and to consider things like somebody's age. So they've removed considering people's youth and also considering if people are remorseful for their actions. And this just kind of adds to that. The the response to these kinds of awful things happening, like our first responders being safe in their jobs, can't just be, oh well, after it happens we'll just make the punishment more severe.
Yeah, well,
We have to stop it
let's look at
happening in the
that.
first place.
Yeah, let's look at that. So this is the new
Yeah.
legislation coming out talking about harsher penalties on first offenders. Sorry, on
Yeah.
first responders if they suffer attacks. Yeah, just share your thoughts on that first of all before we go any deeper.
First of all, I think it's really important that particularly first responders are safe in their job. Everybody deserves to be safe. Nobody deserves to be assaulted in their workplace. That's period. But this bill is based on the assumption that if somebody were to attack a first responder, they would even weigh up, if I attack this person, I'll get 3 years. And if I attack this person who happens to be a paramedic or a police officer or a prison officer, then I'm going to get 5 years. Therefore, I'm not going to do that. I'll attack this person instead. Like when it comes to crime and people breaking the law, really often people don't consider what differences there are in sentencing when it comes to different types of acts because they simply don't know. I think most members of parliament wouldn't know what time and what terms of imprisonment match different levels of crime, whether that's murder, manslaughter, whatever, assault, aggravated robbery, burglary, all of these things. Most people don't understand the complexities around sentencing in terms of imprisonment. So it relies on that assumption that people think that there will be a bigger punishment, which people don't know because people don't think that they'll get caught for crime. But when we're thinking about first responders and people lashing out, you can kind of imagine the sort of person who would lash out at somebody that's trying to help them, and that would be someone who is deeply mentally unwell.
Or they're in the moment they have impaired themselves with drugs or alcohol, so they're not thinking
Exactly.
squarely or not seeing it squarely. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's important that we take that context into consideration because if you have someone who is severely mentally unwell to the point where they are abusing or assaulting the people that are trying to help them, that shows you what kind of state of mind they're in. They don't need a prison cell, they need intense care support through our health system. And so, matching that with longer jail sentences and longer terms of imprisonment is not going to keep people safer. But there are a number of other ways to keep people safer and make their working conditions better so that they are not in dangerous situations as well. But I know that the government is not interested in those more proactive, preventative ways of keeping our community safe.